How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Hey, Daf 35 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends, Daf 35 is, in my opinion, a very interesting daf. Daf 35, we talk about cheese from non-Jews. Right? We had learned in our Mishnah, Daf Choftes, that we don't eat the cheese from non-Jews. We saw a discussion at the end of the daf yesterday about the Gvinas Beis Yoki from this place where most of the calves were slaughtered for Avodah Zarah, but that kind of segues into a discussion about cheese in general and a conversation between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yoshua that we saw in our Mishnah, and that gets into a general discussion about consuming the cheese, Jews consuming cheese from non-Jews and the kosher implications for that. There's going to be a very interesting tosfos on that. There's going to be a few interesting tosfos in today. After we are done discussing cheese, we're going to get to a new Mishnah where some other interesting things come up, like milk, right? The concept of Chalav Israel. Mamish, the Mishnah is going to talk about milk that was milked by a non-Jew. Is that kosher? Right? Well, the Mishnah is going to say it is not kosher. We're going to discuss that. We are going to discuss bread baked by a non-Jewish baker. In the Mishnah will come up oil, which really we're going to talk about mainly tomorrow, or maybe, definitely tomorrow, but I think maybe also even the day after that. So in my opinion, there's some very interesting topics that are coming up that are kind of practical and I think just kind of interesting in my opinion. And when we see a few interesting perspectives of tosfos, which I think is pretty cool. So this is going to be a great one, friends. Here we go. We're going to start on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis. We're going to start on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis by the two dots, about, I'd say, 10 or so lines from the bottom of Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shal Rabbi Shmuel. So this was from the Mishnah on Daf Choftes Amud Beis. Rabbi Yehuda brings up, he mentions this discussion. In my mind, they were like almost, does it even say that they were like walking together? In my mind, this was like they were walking someplace. There you go, yeah, they were mamish, they were on a spatzir. And there was a discussion between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yoshua, what's the story with cheese, right, with gvina of the Avodah Kochavim, right? What does the Mishnah say? That they were mahalchin bader. So he says, where am I? How come the cheese from the gvinos of the Kochavim, how come it's not kosher? How come we don't eat it? So Yeshua had initially responded that, well, because how do you make non-kosher cheese, right? Well, you have a non-Jewish person who, let's say, milks a cow, let's say, and then there's milk. But how do you make it? How do you make the milk into cheese? So they say, using rennet. Rennet is the enzyme to make milk into cheese. I don't know this for sure, but that's like my you always hear about rennet and cheese, and that's how the Gemara seems to be discussing it. I didn't really look into cheese making, but let's just go with that. You add rennet. I have seen like random YouTube videos about making cheese. I think that's about it. You just take milk, I think, add like rennet, and then start cheesing. Anyways, so Yeshua says, well, because the rennet that they use is inevitably going to come from nevela, right? Who's going to slaughter the animal? Let's say the rennet, can rennet I imagine come from cows, I think sheep, maybe, who knows, maybe goats, who knows these things. But it does come from an animal's stomach. That is what I seem to understand. And that animal is not going to be slaughtered, and therefore it's going to be nevela. And the problem with the cheese is going to be that it's going to be cheesed. When I say cheesed, it means made into cheese. It's going to be cheesed using rennet from an animal that wasn't kosherly slaughtered, and that's going to be a problem for the resulting product. To which Rabbi Yishmael had responded from an argument based on a korban ola, where technically speaking, the rennet of a korban ola is mutter midoraisa, and even though a korban ola is more stringent than nevela in that it's also bana, and you could be chayv and ashram ilos for getting hana from it, both things which are not relevant to nevela, right? So the point being that an ola is more stringent than nevela, and yet midoraisa, the rennet from a korban ola is okay. So I would imagine that the rennet from a nevela should also be okay. Yeah, I'm going through that. I'm kind of reviewing this discussion from the Mishnah, but it's going to be helpful now, I think, in the Gemara that we're about to learn. And there's just one more piece there, which is that then Rabbi Yeshua said, okay, fine, it's not about the nevela. It is though because they may use rennet from a cow that was used for Avodah Zarah. What does he say? He says, Kevaz Olach, okay. Okay, because the cheese from an Oved Kochavim could, right, the rennet can come from a calf that was used for Avodah Zarah, in which case you can't eat the cheese because there's an Avodah Zarah element to it. And to that also, Rabbi Yishmael said, yes, but if that's the case, it should even be Asur Ba'ano. If it's an issue of Avodah Zarah, and the Chachamim had said, though, that it's only Asur Ba'achila, Mutter Ba'ano. So this was this discussion that took place, this dialogue that took place between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yishmael really drilling Rabbi Yoshua. Tosfos Taka says in Daf Lamed Hayom Aleph that it says, Taka quotes from the Yerushalmi that Rabbi Yishmael caught in Hayba Osashah, that Rabbi Yishmael was Dafke, he was younger at that time. Rabbi Yeshua was older, and Rabbi Yishmael was there with him, and he was really drilling Rabbi Yeshua to try to understand what the issue is with Gvina Sovdei Kochavim. And we are going to see also pretty interesting, some more interesting context around that in just a little bit on today's daf. So that was a bit of a review from the Mishnah that's going to kind of get us warmed up for the Gemara ahead. So here we go. We're going to start in daf Lamadalid Amid Beis, about 10 lines from the bottom. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shal Rabbi Yishmael. Right. So this is an excerpt from the Mishnah that Rabbi Yoshua had brought up, had quoted this dialogue, had mentioned this dialogue from right between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yoshua. What does the Gemara say? Where are we? Omar Rav Achtavoy Omar Rab Hamakadesh beperesh shoranisko. We're going to tie it back to our Mishnah and the discussion that I just brought up in just a few minutes, but this is kind of all related. So Amar of Achtavoy Amar Rab Hamakadesh beperesh shoranisko mikudeshes beperesh egle avodas kochavim and mikudeshes. What's perish? Perish is dung. What does dung have to do with rennet? Well, both dung and rennet are extractions from the animal. It's not the animal itself, right? It's the excrement of the animal. It's removed from the animal. So is rennet. Rennet is not the meat of the animal itself. It's an enzyme that's extracted from the animal. So basically the idea is whatever we can apply to the dung of an animal should be applicable to the rennet of the animal. So now, it says, a fellow is mekadesh a fella, and he has a great idea. Instead of giving her a gold ring, I will give her dung. And she's like, wow, that was really creative. You're a unique guy. Hamakadesh beperish shoranisko. So a fellow is mekadesh a fella with the dung of a shoranisko. A shoranisko is an animal. Let's say you have an ox that gored and killed a person. So we stone that ox, and that right. It says sokol yisokel hashor. What is it? I think actually yes. It says sokol yisokel hashor. V'lo ye'ochel es besaru, and you can't eat it. It's also ba'ano be'etzim. It's also ba'ano. So we say that if a person is mekadesh a woman with the dung of a shor aniskal, now a shor aniskal is also ba'ano. What about the dung? Mikudeshes. She is mikudeshes. it works. Mazel tov. However, beperish, egli avodas kechovim. However, if he's mekadesher with the dung of a calf of avodah zarah, einem kudeshes. In that case, he can't be mekadesher with that dung from avodah zarah. Ibai say misvar, ibai say makra. And says the Gemara, I can explain this logically, and I can also explain it versely, based on verses. Ibai say misvar. Here's the logic argument. Gabi egle avodas kechavim nichole bin fache. That when it comes to a calf for avodah zarah, you want to feed it as much as possible. You want to fatten it up to make it nice and geschmack for the getchkin. And therefore, I imagine because the dung is a result of a positive desire, a positive motivation, a positive result. I don't know what the word I'm thinking of is, but it's something you development that. But the point is that you want to feed the animal to make it nice and fat and geschmack and plump for the getchke, and as a result of that, there's dung. So that dung is a result of the fattening process, which is desirable for the avodah zarah. So therefore, the dung itself is going to be also off limits, is going to be forbidden. Aval gabe shor niskol, but when it comes to a shor niskol, an ox that is condemned to stoning, lo nichale bin fache. There's no particular desire to feed it real good. You have to stone it. It's also no. There's nothing positive about this animal right now, and therefore any dung is kind of, it's okay. Who cares? Use it. It's free game. Ibai sema, alternatively, I can bring you verses to back up the use or forbiddenness of the dung from verses. It says by avodah zarah, lo yidbak biyadcha me'uma. It says by avodah zarah, and you can't have anything, not even the dung. It says by shor niskol, sako yisakol ashor v'lo yachos besaro. It says by shor niskol, you have to stone the shore, and you can't have the meat. Besaro aser, the meat is forbidden. Persho muteris, but the dung, that's okay. It's not the meat, it's the dung. That's okay. All right. Now, here we're going to tie it into our Mishnah. Amar Rava Tavayu Tanani, and says Rava, you can also learn this out from our Mishnah based on the relationship that we have with the rennet of a nevela, which is also the rennet of a nevela, as opposed to the rennet. Well, actually, okay. Rennet of nevela, which we learn out from korban ola, which is asur ba'anah. So the rennet of something that's asur ba'anah versus the rennet of avodah zarah. Here we go. So basically, the result, the conclusions that we have for rennet could also be applied to perish, because both are sort of extractions from the animal. It says Rava Tavayu Tanani. We can learn the relationship we have with the dung of the avodah zarah and of the shor niskol from our Mishnah. Okay, and as we discussed at the beginning or earlier, before we jumped into the Gemara, in the discussion between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yoshua, the first answer that Rabbi Yoshua had replied to Rabbi Yishmael was that the reason why Gvinas of the Kochavim is not kosher is because Shema'amidin bekevas nevela, that this cheese, the Gvinas of the Kochavim, is cheesed with rennet from a nevela. And what did Rabbi Yishmael respond to him? And Rabbi Yishmael responded, yeah, but v'alo kevas ola chamura mikevas nevela, but the rennet of a korban ola, of course, goes on entirely on the mizbeach, and it's asur ba'anah. You can't get any benefit from it. If you do, then you have to bring a korban ashram me'ilos. And yet, mida oraisa, the rennet is okay. So we see, michlal, the isuri anoya show pershayu. that by something that's also bano, like the korban ola, nonetheless, what is extracted from the korban ola, the rennet, is permitted. So we see that something that's also bano, the rennet or the extraction is permitted. So therefore, something that's also bano, like a shora niskol, its perish would be permitted, and therefore, if Mekadesh woman with the dung of a shora niskol, it should be permitted. And at the same time, also the kevas evle avodas kochavim. And then when Rabbi Yoshua gave a second possibility, which is, right, a second suggestion, which is that the gvinas of the kochavim is problematic because they use rennet of calves for avodah zarah. And there, Rabbi Yishmael says, okay, I understand why that is a problem. However, the question that I have, says Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Yishmael responds, well, if that's the case, I get it that that's a problem, that the rennet of a calf of avodah zarah is going to be a problem. But my question then is, why do the Chacham say that it's only asur b'achila and mutar b'ano? It should be asur b'ano. So michlal, so we see that avodas kochavim asur parshayu. That when it comes to avodah zarah, the rennet is asur, and by the same token, the perish, the dung of avodas kochavim would be asur, and therefore one would be unable to be mekadesh a woman with the dung of avodah zarah. So we used our Mishnah and the relationship that we have between rennet of a korban ola and the rennet of avodah zarah in order to apply that to this other, what was it, a Mishnah or a Brisa, that maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's even just simply a statement of Amoraim, that with the relationship between being Mekadesh a woman, regarding being Mekadesh a woman with the dung of Shora Niskol or an animal of Avodah Zarah. Okay, Gibaldik. Now, flag the Gemara, V'lehader lei mishum deleisi lisur be'ene. Why doesn't Rabbi Yoshua respond to Rabbi Yishmael and say the reason why, the gevinas of the kochavim is asur ba'achila but mutar ba'hana'ah, even though there's the rennet of the avodah zarah, the reason why it's mutar ba'hana'ah is because because you can't see the rennet. The rennet is just an enzyme that's in the cheese, and therefore that's why it's mutar ba'hana'ah. Why didn't Rabbi Yeshua respond that way? Morius, because after all, Morius in the Mishnah, which was yesterday that fish fat kind of thing, l'Rabbanan delo asru ba'hana'ah, that when it came to the Morius, the rabbi said it's permitted to get benefit from it. My time allowed mishum deleisi lisur be'ene. Is it not because, is the reason why it's mutar ba'hana'ah according to the rabbis, is it not because what's also in it, which would be the wine, is that, well, you don't see the wine. The wine is just kind of mixed into this Morius product, so therefore it is mutar ba'hana'ah. So Amar, so they answer the reason why Rabbi Yeshua couldn't suggest that the rennet is sort of not the main, it's just kind of an enzyme in it, and therefore it's mutar ba'hana'ah. The reason why Rabbi Yeshua did not answer that way is came into ukme kamokim. Well, because rennet is kind of like the key to cheese, right? You got no rennet, you got no cheese, right? The rennet plays a outsized role in cheesing. And therefore, chashav le'kaman de'isa le'isur be'ene. And therefore, even though maybe you don't see the rennet, but because it's such a powerful force in cheesing, it is, what do we say? Kiman de'isa le'isur be'ene. It's as though it's like mamish there. It's as though it's like mamish there. And therefore, Rabbi Yishmael's question was a solid question, that if the rennet is coming from a calf of avodah zarah, it really should be asur ba'hana'ah. And it was at that point of the Mishnah that Rabbi Yoshua changed the topic. And we are now going to explore that aspect. Why did Rabbi Yoshua change the topic? Why did he change the topic to what he changed the topic to? Okay, so we're going to see that just now. So now the Gemara quotes the next section of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yeshua then proceeded to change the topic, right? Because the Chachamim had said that Gvinas of the Kochavim is mutter ba'ano. Rabbi Shmuel says, I don't get it. It should be also ba'ano if the concern is Avodah Zarah. Rabbi Yeshua then promptly changed the topic. My kitovim dodecha miyayin. Now the Gemara first asks, what does the pasuk mean in Shir when it says that your love is greater than wine? What a beautiful pasuk. Your love is greater than wine. Just Rav Dimi Omar, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said, Omra Knesses Yisrael, this is extremely interesting. Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Yidden said before the Rabbeinu Shalom, Arevim olai divrei doidecha yoser miyeno shel terer. Wow. That the Yidden said before the Rabbeinu Shalom that it is more desirable to us, it is sweeter to us, the words of your beloved, says Rashi, divrei doidecha, divrei sofer, the rabbis. Yosem yena shel Torah, Rashi says, yena ikar Torah shebichsab. The Yidden say before the Rabbeinu Shalom that it is sweeter to us. Chazal, the divrei Chazal, the Torah Shebal Peh, the Babylon Talmud, the Milchamta Shel Torah, the sort of experience of, Torah Shema Peh, Mishnayos, and Gemara, and the words of the rabbis, and that beauty is more sweet to us than the written Torah Shebichsav itself. Wow. Ooh. And you see that sometimes also. Sometimes it comes up in the Gemara. It's come up a few times in the Gemara. What did it say? It's like, why did sometimes the Gemara will have, what does it say? Like sometimes basically the Gemara prefers to use an opinion that comes from like the rabbis because it's like more beloved. It's more exciting to kind of use a rabbinic opinion or something. I'd have to look that. I actually did look it up. I think maybe yesterday or something, but I probably should have looked up what the context was and not just look for the quote. It is on Daf Beis and Beis and Masechta Yevamos, and I think it's coming to other places also. That sometimes like preference is given to like a rabbinic piece of like text or something because that's like more. It's more of like the vibe because it's rabbinic. It's ours. It's more exciting to us. We have like more ownership over it. Very, very cool stuff. Again, on Knesset itself, Nekadosh Baruch Hu, Rabbeinu Shalom, Arevim olai divrei doidecha yoser miyeno shel Torah. Woof! Would you look at that? Ma'ishna haikra d'shayle. Now, Rabbi Yeshua changed the topic, right? Why did first of all, what's the deal? I don't like Rabbi Yeshua was the great Rabbi Yeshua, right? I think he was like, Rabbi Yeshua is associated with wisdom. What does the last Mishnah Masechta Sota say? Who could tell me what the last Mishnah Masechta Sota say? Says we'd have to look it up. I feel it says something like when Rabbi Yeshua died, then that's when like wisdom went away. Should we look it up real quick? Let's look it up real quick. Come on, Sota word. We're Sota. Here it is. Here, Masechta Sota. Okay, it must be on like Daf. Must be on Daf like Mem. Or something. Come on. Sota. Okay, here we are. Sota. Okay. Where is this? Well, okay. What does it say? Come on. Here, what's this? Okay, here it is. It's mamish all the way at the end of Masechta Sota. Mamish Mem Testament base. All the last like 5 lines of Masechta Sota. I actually had it underlined over here. Mamish had it underlined. Whenever there's something I want to remember in the Gemara, I always underline it. So it's easy to find. This time I actually assumed that I didn't underline it. Anyways, it says Mishameis Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yeshua died Batla Eitzo Machshava. Rabbi Yeshua died, so then advice and thought and wisdom went away. So what's the deal? Right? Rabbi Yeshua, they're walking. Rabbi Yishmael is asking Rabbi Yeshua questions. Rabbi Yeshua didn't know the answer. He changed the topic. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's more to this story. So, Mashna Haikra D'Shayle, why did Rabbi Yeshua change the topic to this particular pasuk about asking ki tovim dodecha miyayin, dodayich miyayin? Reb Shimon ben Pazi, says Reb Shimon ben Pazi v'tema Reb Shimon bar Ami Mereisha Dikra. Because Rabbi Yoshua wanted to communicate to Rabbi Shmuel the first part of the pasuk, Ka'amalei Yashkeni min shikis piu, that he drinks me from the kisses of his mouth. No, what? That was clever. That was embarrassing. Back up 30 seconds. Yishakeni min shikos piu. Whoa, that was potentially very embarrassing. Sometimes I think on Babylon Talmud, I make these kinds of, like I'll read something wrong, even though I know how to read it. Like I knew that this was Yishakeni Mishos, but sometimes as I'm reading it, I'm just like, the wrong way slips into my mind. Yishakeni minashikos piu. Okay. It's embarrassing. It's like such a classic pasuk. That he will kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. Omar le Yishmo achi. Rabbi Yoshua is saying to Rabbi Yishmael, Yishmael, my brother, chashok sifsosecha, close your lips, zobozo, together, val tivoel lehashid. Don't be so quick to answer. Rabbi Yishmael was really pressing Rabbi Yoshua about this cheese. And he kept on pressing, at which point Rabbi Yoshua basically said, stop. My timer. How come Rabbi Yeshua said stop? Omer Ula says Ula, Vitem Rav Shmuel bar Abba. Gezerah Chadasha he, because at that point, this was a new Gezerah. And we're going to talk about, right, just in a few minutes, we're going to talk about why did they decide that there's an issue with Gvinas Oved Kucham. At that time, it was a new Gezerah. Ve'ein mitbakbekin ba. And we don't sort of pry too much and try to uncover too much, says Rashi. V'mefarshin taima, we don't explain the reason, the rationale for these new gezeras right away. My gezerta. And what was the reason for the gezera? And here we're going to get into a bunch of we're segueing into several suggestions for the rationale behind the gezera about why we consider Gvinas Oved Kucham to be non-kosher. Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Reb Yeshua ben Levi, Mishum Nikur. So Shimon ben Pazi named Reb Yeshua ben Levi because of a snake bite, of venom, be'etzim, of gilui. Issue is gilui. That the cheese starts as milk, and the milk curdles and cheeses, and the concern is that it was left uncovered, and that there's a concern of gilui, that there's venom in it. So why didn't Rabbi Yeshua simply say to Rabbi Yishmael, hey, as he says, Achi, Yishmael, Achi, bro, this is a new gezerah because we're concerned about gilui, we're concerned about venom. Because of Ula Damar Ula, that says, Ula ki gazre gezertu b'mayrova, that in Eretz Yisrael, when they would make a new gezerah in Eretz Yisrael, for example, this one, that the Gvinas Oved Kucham is not kosher, lo megalu taima, they wouldn't give the reason for the gezerah right away, atreser yarchei shater, for the first 12 months of the gezerah, Dilma iko inish dilo svirale, because maybe somebody will disagree with that rationale. And he will act disparagingly towards the gezerah. Whereas if they just say this gezerah needs to be made, then the idea is that people will say, okay, there must be a reason why the rabbis are saying this. Let's just go along with it. And then a year later, when they reveal the rationale, at that point, it's already been adapted. And that is why they don't give the rationale right away, because if they say this is new and this is why, then people will have their opinions and it could be problematic for implementation and the success of the gezerah. So if they kick that can down the road, or whatever that's called, so then hopefully by the time that discussion opens up, it will already be adapted. It's interesting. Tomorrow we are going to get into the discussion. We are going to discuss the concept of gezeras and the adoption of gezeras and what role that plays in being able to rescind gezeras. That is an interesting discussion as well. We will get to that, although it's going to come up actually a shtickle on today's daf as well a little bit later. Anyways, so that is why Rabbi Yoshua did not want to reveal to Rabbi Shmuel right away that the real reason for the Isur, for the Gzera against Gvina Shel Ovdei Kochavim is because of snake venom. Rabbi Yoshua didn't want to share that right now because it was a new Gezerah, and we don't immediately disclose the rationale for the decision for the first 12 months. At least in Eretz Yisrael, that was their approach. Okay. Fine. Megadi bar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah asks a kasha on this notion, on the suggestion that the reason for the Gezerah by Gvinas of the Kochav was because of venom. Says Rabbi Yirmiyah, but Elamei Ata, if that is so, Yivesha Tishtri. Well then, if the cheese gets dry, if it dries out, it's no longer moist, it's no longer milky and moist, it's dried out, well then that should be permitted then. Yashan Tishtri. If the cheese, I guess, ages, it should be permitted. Dam Reb Chanina, says Reb Chanina, Yavesh mutter manicho liyavesh. Yashan mutter manicho liyashan. Now when it comes to snake venom and the concern about gilui, well, snake venom has a quality that it prevents things from drying out. It prevents things from aging. And therefore, if we have this dried cheese, if we have aged cheese, well then it should be permitted because that memela means that there's no venom in it. And yet there's a low plug when it comes to Gvinas Ovdei Kochavim. You can't have Gvinas Ovdei Kochavim that is dried or aged. And therefore, if the rationale was because of the venom, then it doesn't add up because then dried, aged cheese should be acceptable. So now, Amr Rab Chanina l'fi she'efshar lo below tzchzuchei chalab. So it says Rab Chanina, Tosfos Taka assumes it's Rab Yirmiyah, l'fi she'efshar lo below tzchzuchei chalab. Says Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos about what this means. Rashi says that what this means is that, well, it's a concern about non-kosher milk. It's concern about milk from a behema tameya. Milk from a behema tameya, non-kosher milk. What is the concern? The concern is that maybe there is some milk of a behema tameya that got mixed in to the cheese, right? This is Gvinas Ovdei Kochavim, cheese from Ovdei Kochavim, maybe mixed into the milk, maybe mixed into the kosher milk. Now, an interesting characteristic, as we'll learn about later on as well, an interesting characteristic of non-kosher milk is that it doesn't cheese, doesn't curdle. So maybe mixed into the kosher milk is some non-kosher milk. The kosher milk will cheese, but there will be some air pockets, some bubbles in the cheese. And hanging out in those bubbles in the cheese could be some non-kosher milk that didn't cheese. And the concern is that you may be consuming some non-kosher milk in the cheese. Says Rashi that it's a different answer. Where basically Rabbi Shua ben Levi had said that the issue is the venom, but comes Rabbi Chanina to say, no, it's not about the venom because then aged, dried would be okay. It's about a different reason, which is that essentially maybe there's some non-kosher milk that got mixed into the kosher milk, and you're going to be consuming non-kosher milk that's hanging out in the air pockets in the cheese. Says Tosfos, I don't buy it, I don't agree, says Tosfos. Because why would anybody mix non-kosher milk into cheese? It doesn't cheese, it doesn't curdle. Who would do that? If you're making cheese, you would use milk that cheeses. Why would he mix non-kosher milk into it? Therefore, tosfos says, actually, we're sticking with Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's answer. Actually, says tosfos, it's still about the venom. And tosfos says something really interesting that I'm going to save for the end, for the end of this Gemara. Tosfos says some really interesting stuff. But says tosfos, it's still about the venom. And what it means is that, yes, you're right. When there's venom, it prevents aging. It prevents drying. But the thing is, there's a concern that even though maybe the outside may get dried out, but the concern is that in the inside, the soft part of the cheese is still going to be moist, and there could be some venom in there. So therefore, if we say that, well, if the cheese dries out, it should be permitted. No, it shouldn't. Because even though it may look dried, and maybe the outside is crusted, but the inside could still be moist, and there's still a concern about venom. That's a nice little machlokes there between Rashi and tosfos about, right? Rashi saying the concern is about there being tomei milk in the cheese. Tosfos says that, no, it's still the same concern that we had initially of the venom. Very interesting stuff. Ushmuel Amar, moving on, Shmuel says, Mipnei shema'amidin oso be'or kevas nevela, that the concern is that the cheese of an Avodah, the gvinas of the kochavim, is going to be cheesed in the stomach of a nevela. That the cheese is going to be cheesed inside of the stomach of a nevela. Hakeva gufa sharia, but that implies that according to Shmuel, the rennet itself though would be okay, right? The fact that it's being, but the fact that the cheese is developing in the stomach of the nevela is what Shmuel is pointing out as the issue. But the rennet doesn't seem to be an issue when it comes to the rennet of nevela. But does Shmuel say this? Does Shmuel really say that the rennet of a nevela is permitted? That's not. We learn in the Mishnah in Chulin, Kevasa Oved Kochavin, that the rennet of a animal that was slaughtered by an Oved Kochavim, Mishal Nevela, or that of Nevela, Harezo Asura is forbidden. And we ask, okay, we ask, what does it mean, the rennet of an Oved Kochavim and of Nevela? Anything slaughtered by an Oved Kochavim is Memela Nevela. So, Shmuel says, Shmuel, Katani, the way that you understand the Mishnah is that it's all one thing. Kevas, Shchitas, Oved Kochavim, Nevela, Asura, that the rennet of an animal slaughtered by an Oved Kochavim, which is therefore Nevela, that rennet is Asura. So, why is Shmuel saying that the issue with Gvinas Oved Kochavim is that it develops in the stomach of a nevela, implying that the rennet of the nevela is actually okay if Shmuel explains the Mishnah in Chulin as being that the rennet of a nevela is not okay? Answers the Gemara, lo kasha, kan kodem chazar, kan la'achar chazar, u'mishnah lo zazim imekoma. Okay, we've seen this before. We saw it in Masechta Shavuos recently, that there's two conflicting, I wouldn't say necessarily two conflicting Mishnayos, although they are conflicting, but chronologically, there was an order to them. Basically, first came the Mishnah in Chulin, in which the assumption was that the rennet of a nevela is forbidden, but then, right, but after this shpatzir of Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yehoshua, where they had this dialogue where it emerged that actually the rennet of a nevela should be permitted, well, at that point it became permitted, and therefore when Shmuel says that the issue is that the cheese is going to develop in the stomach of a nevela, implying that the rennet itself of a nevela is okay, that was post the discussion between Rabbi Yishmael, the shpatzir of Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Yehoshua. The Mishnah in Chulin that at the time Shmuel was commenting on, that was prior to that shpatzir, and at that point the assumption was that the rennet is asura, but post shpatzir it emerged that the rennet of a nevela is actually okay, and it was with that understanding that Shmuel said that the issue is that the cheese is developing in the stomach of an avela, but the rennet itself would be permitted. Right? It says, Kan, Kodem Chazara, Kan La'achar Chazara. The Mishnah in Chulin is pre-Spatzir, pre-reversal, and the opinion of Shmuel saying that the rennet is acceptable is post-Spatzir, U'Mishnah Lo Zaz Mimakoma, but the Mishnayos, we keep the way they are, because once the Mishnayos is released, people start learning it and accepting it, and we can't just take it back. Therefore, we keep the Mishnayos there, but we explain why there seems to be a discrepancy. Rav Malchia Mishmei, Rav Adabar Ahava, Omar, says Rav Malchia in the name of Rav Adabar Ahava, Mipnei Shemachlikin Poneh B'Shuman Chazir. Okay. Okay, that's pretty explicit. That they, what would be the word for that? That they wax, they somehow smear the fat, lard. They they smother it in lard afterwards. They cover it in lard afterwards. So yeah, that'll be a problem. Rav Chizda Omar says Rav Chizda Pnei Shema'amidin also bechometz. Says Rav Chizda because they so says Rav Chizda actually that they would cheese it. I guess vinegar can cause milk to curdle. Okay, and they would use vinegar, wine vinegar, and therefore it's a problem. Yenesa. Rav Nachman. So here it says Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Tosfos Taka makes the argument that it's Rav Nachman. We'll go with that. We're going to replace Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak with Rav Nachman. It's part of his kind of arguing. Let's just go with Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says Rav Nachman Pnei Shema'amidin Osa, because they would cheese it bisrafa orla, with the sap of orla, and orla is also ba'ano. The Gemara is going to ask, then it should be also ba'ano. But anyways, Kaman, who is that like? Ki I Tana, like the following Tana, the Tanan. I think it's the Tanan. The Tanan, yeah, the Tanan. Reb Eliezer Omer says, Reb Eliezer, Amaymid bisrafa orla, that somebody who cheeses with the sap of orla, also that cheese is forbidden. Ripnei shehu peri, because the sap of orla is considered like the fruit itself, like the orla itself. And you could say actually this is not only the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Yeshua would agree with this, because Adkano Polig Rabbi Yeshua Rabbi Eliezer that that's not good. That when Rabbi Yeshua argues with Rabbi Eliezer, it's only with regard to the sap of the stumps. Okay, that the sap of the tree itself, Rabbi Yeshua says that is not orla, and Rabbi Eliezer says it is orla. Where am I? Rabbi Yeshua with the sap of the tree itself, of Abekatva de Feira, but with the sap of the fruit, Modi, Rabbi Yeshua would agree that the sap of the fruit itself would be considered orla and would be unusable for cheesing. That is that which we learn in that Mishnah in Orla. Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yeshua Shamaiti, I heard beferish explicitly, Shema'amidim b'safa olin, u'v'safa ikarin, that you can cheese with the sap of the leaves or of the roots, mutter, that's permitted, but b'safa pagin, but the sap of the fruits, or maybe unripe fruits, also that is not allowed, mepnei shehu peri, because that would be considered Orla itself, and not allowed to be considered the fruits of Orla. Bein l'Rav Chizda, bein l'Rav Nachman, titzer ba'anoya kasher. The Gemara then asks, but both according to Rav Chizda as well as Rav Chizda, who said that they cheese it that they use vinegar as the enzyme. Well, okay, and according to Rav Nachman, who says that they use sap of Orla as the enzyme, in both of those scenarios, then the resulting product, the cheese, should be not just also b'achila, but also b'hanoah. We say kasha. It's not a good point. Chevra, now listen to this, Chevra. Listen to this. Okay, so first of all, why did I say just now, let's say Rav Nachman versus Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak? It's part of Tosfos's argument to say that what is the reason, Chevra, is very interesting. Chevra, you ready? What is the reason why we do not eat Gvinas Ovdei Kochavim? Says Tosfos, the reason is, as Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, the poison. Is because of the poison. The issue is because of the poison. And now, Tosfos says something, it says a few things that are very interesting. One thing that he says very interesting is the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. I'm nervous that I keep on hitting this microphone. I feel like maybe I need to move it up a little bit. One is the opinion that, is this Rabbeinu Tam's opinion? I can't remember. But Tosfos says, look, the whole is very interesting, Chavit. The whole concept of gilui, by wine, by water, that snakes are going to venomize these uncovered liquids. It's not shaykh anymore. I'm going to read you what Tosfos says. He says, we don't have, thank God, we don't really have, depends where you live, I guess, but thank God where I live, I just have like spiders, some cockroaches sometimes. I think I'm not snakes. We don't have snakes. We don't really deal with snake venom very often. Therefore, this concept of gilui isn't actually a thing for us, which is very interesting. Just generally, like you leave like water and stuff uncovered overnight and stuff. Tosfos seems to be saying, now, do we pass in this way? I don't know. I'm saying what Tosfos is saying, but Tosfos is saying that actually this concept of gilui isn't shaykh right now, because we don't have snakes where we live, which is one thing that's interesting. And secondly, what's interesting is that, and therefore, if the reason why gvinas of the kochavim is not kosher is because of gilui, well, then that also falls. And if that's the reason for gvinas of the kochavim to be problematic, well, then that isn't actually, that's no longer a concern. And therefore, there's no issue with gvinas of the kochavim. Tosfos then says, look, if you could find cheese that is made with some kind of enzyme that isn't from an animal, that would be good, right? What does he say? He says, I assume that what that means is that they use some kind of plant-based enzyme. I assume that's what that means, and that would be fine. But then Tosfos does say, though, at the end, and I have to make this clear, Tosfos does say, though, at the end, my impression from Tosfos, though, is not that there's no such thing as non-kosher cheese. Generally speaking, I think that we generally accept that cheese does need to be kosher. And Tosfos has some other concerns that maybe the cheese was, I think at the end he says what? That maybe the cheese is cheesing in I think Tavracher would be a pig, so maybe there's some pig involved. Also, there could be concern that maybe there's salt, maybe they added salt, maybe they're cheesing it in some kind of a stomach, and in that stomach they added salt, or at least the hide around it, in which case, well, salt would actually be then considered like cooking, right? What does he say? He says, Malea chareu kuroseach, it's like it's cooking, in which case you have to be concerned about basar v'chalav. So there are concerns. Tosfos at the end doesn't, the way I understand it, Tosfos doesn't seem to be saying, okay, there's no such thing as non-kosher cheese. But I do think it was very interesting, right? Because what does he say? He says, Ki achshav lo matzinu tam poshit le'isur b'gvinas ovei kuchom. Tosfos says, I don't see an obvious reason why gvinas ovei kuchom should be also. The tam isur mishum nikur. His issue is for nikur, which is basically gilu, and he says the gilu isn't shaykh anymore. But again, I'm definitely not saying go and eat non-kosher cheese, but it seems like there's an interesting discussion to be had over here. Okay, where are we? Getting back into our Gemara. Dosh Rav Nachman B'Yedei of Chisda, Darsh Ma'adik said, what does the pasuk mean? L'reach, for smell, for fragrance, shmanecha tovim, your oils are good. L'ma Talmud Chacham Doma, what is a Torah scholar similar to the tzluchis shel pleitin, to a flask of balsam oil? Megula, when it is opened, reicha nodef, its shmek goes out. Mechusa is exposed and enjoyed. Mechusa, when it is closed, ein reicha nodef, its shmek does not shmek. Not only that, ela dvarim shemechusim mimenu mizgalna. At Talmud Chacham, things that are hidden from him are revealed to him. Shenemar alamos evucha, right? It says l'rech shmenecha tovim shemen tuach shmecha alkin alamos evucha. Kribe alumis, those that are hidden, those that are concealed. V'lo, not only that, ella shamalach hamovis sohavu. Now that's a perk. The angel of death loves him. Shenemar alamos evucha kribe al moves, on death. That's a nice perk. V'lo, not only that, ella shenoichel shnei olamos, that he inherits two worlds, echad olam hazeh, echad olam haba, this world and the next. Shenemar alamos kribe olamos. Say alamos evucha is olamos, worlds. Okay, so that be'etzim wraps up our discussion about gvinas oved kucha of the chum, which I think was a very interesting discussion in my opinion. And now we move on to the next Mishnah, discussing some other interesting things. The following things of Ovdei Kochavim are forbidden. The Ein Isur Nisrana, but they are permitted for benefit. You can't eat them, but you can benefit from them. Chalav Shechelvo Ovid Kochavim. Vein Yisur Ro'eu. Milk that was milked by an Ovid Kochavim, and the Yid, it's not supervised. The Yid does not see the milking happening. So be'etzim cholav stam, cholav akum. What do we call it? Cholav stam, right? There's cholav yisrael and there's cholav stam, I think. So I think there's a famous psak of Reb Moshe Feinstein. Is that what I think we rely maybe on the Josh Weinberg. Josh Weinberg, he's my posek. Whenever I have a lachic shot, I ask Josh. I mean, he's not a rabbi or anything. You can try asking him, but yeah, I don't know if I have any friends who are like poseks. I'm a little surprised. I don't know. I feel like I would have imagined that like I'd have some friend who became like a rabbi or something. I don't know. I just asked Josh. He's just my friend. For some reason, he knows these things. I don't know why. I feel like whenever I have a lachic shot, I ask Josh. He seems to know. Josh, why do you know this stuff? Anyways, Josh, it's the psak of Moshe, right? That's why some people eat chalav stam, because I don't know. Anyways. But this is chalav Yisrael. It's besim chalav Yisrael that any milk that was milked without Jewish supervision, it's also b'shtia, but mutter bano. Ve'apas, also pas akum, bread of Ovdei Kochavim. V'ashemin shalain, as well as their oil. Rabbi Uvezdino itiru hashemin. Rabbi, this is not referring to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, it's actually referring to his grandson, Rabbi Yehuda Nisiya. Rabbi Yehuda Nisiya and his Bezdin permitted oil. The shemin of Ovdei Kochavim. Tosfos Tak on tomorrow's daf says actually something very, very, very interesting here, which is actually, I'm just going to read you Tosfos quickly from tomorrow's daf. Is Delogars to Rabbi Yehuda Anasi Barbre Uvezdinu Itiru v'Chachmei Doro Kavu Davar Zeh Mishnah Shesida Rebbe Zikenu. Isn't that interesting? That says Tosfos that actually in the Mishnah that Rebbe, the Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, had edited, it actually didn't have this line of Rabbi Uvezdino Itiru Hashemin. That was later. It was his grandson who was in Amora, which is also interesting because Tosfos had said the other day, I thought that Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was Tafat Tana. Anyways, I don't know. But Tosfos says that this line was added to the Mishnah later on. How interesting is that? That you can have something in our Mishnah was actually later on added. How interesting is that? Vashlakis, cooked foods. I imagine that this means, what am I up to? I think I'm up to maybe Daf Lam Ches or something. I imagine that we're probably going to be getting into Bishul Akum. Pretty soon, which is an interesting sugya as well. I think these are pretty interesting sugyas. But a lot of tosfos on these sugyas. Taking a long time to learn tosfos on these sugyas, but very shaveh, very interesting practical sugyas, I think. Tosfos adds like a whole new element here. Have you been enjoying the tosfos? It could be the dafs are getting a little bit longer because of it, but I think it's shaveh. It like opens up things. It makes them practical. We're going to see a really interesting tosfos in a few minutes. It's like a whole new level. Great. I feel like it's a big upgrade to Babylon Talmud. Tosfos. And so shlaka is cooked foods, uchvashin, and preserved foods, shedarkin lasis sochen yain v'chometz, where it was customary to put in wine and vinegar. That would be a problem. V'taris trufa. Taris, I believe, was that taris is some kind of, I think, small fish. What's taris? Taris min darbim ketanim meluchim. I'm looking at Rashi. Shenitzfu v'nizbu v'nishtabu adagim ve'eni kar nilka chayshe l'tmeim. Basically, some kind of like ground up fish, like a small little fish that gets all ground. If it's whole, so you could confirm that it's a kosher fish. But if it's all just like ground fish, well, then how do you know that there's not unkosher fish in there? So if it's mixed up, then it's a problem. V'tzir she'ein ba daga kilbis shotetes bo, some kind of a fish brine that does not have some kind of daga kilbis swimming around in it. Basically, if you would make brine with kosher fish, so then inevitably some kind of like, you would have this thing swimming around with it, and that doesn't happen with non-kosher fish. So if you have this brine that doesn't have this kilbis fish swimming around in it, it needs the kilbis fish to identify it as being kosher. Ve'achilak, this was this fish that we had talked about yesterday, which is this fish that is born without fins and scales and then grows fins and scales, and the concern is that it comes with like a whole bunch of them, and you might get some non-kosher fish in there. Umelech, where are we? V'koret shel chiltis, and some kind of green of some kind of sharp vegetable of sorts, that the concern is that maybe some of like the usher stuff from the vessel that is coming in contact with it may have gotten into it. I imagine that we'll probably get into the Gemara. Umelech shalkundis, some kind of shalkundis salt. Okay, fine. I think the Gemara is going to talk about that. Elu asurin ve'ein isuron iser hanoya. These are asurin ba'achila, but mutter ba'hanoah. Now, the Gemara discusses the milk of Ovdei Kolchavim, right? If an Ovdei Kolchavim milks an animal, it needs Jewish supervision. Chalav Israel. Why? In fact, the Gemara, Chalav l'may nechush. What is the concern? What is the concern for Chalav Israel? L'may nechush. Mishum ichlufe. If it's because, well, we're concerned that the kosher milk might be swapped with non-kosher milk. But tar chivar, tamek yaruk. But apparently, kosher milk, while kosher milk is white, non-kosher milk apparently is like yellowish. So you'd be able to tell, if they tried to swap out the kosher milk for the non-kosher milk, you'd be able to identify it as being non-kosher milk. So again, what are we concerned about? V'imishum I aruve. And if the concern is, well, maybe the Ovid Kochavim mixed in some non-kosher milk. And now, so it's kosher milk, but with some non-kosher milk mixed in. But if that's the case, nikum. Well, then we'll just make it into cheese. Damar, cholav tar omed, that kosher milk cheeses, curdles. Cholav tame eno omed, but the non-kosher milk, I don't exactly know what animals they're coming from. Is the assumption like pig or something? It won't cheese. It won't cheese. So why don't you just do an experiment and see if it cheeses? Well, look, if you're looking to make cheese, okay, I get it, fine. But he wants to eat it. He doesn't want to cheese it. He wants to eat it. He's planning to eat it. And therefore he's not planning to make it into cheese. So how are you going to know if there's tamei milk in there? Vinishko mine kali vinekum. Okay, then the Gemara suggests, well, why don't you just take a little bit of the milk and see if it curdles. And if it curdles, so then it's kosher. Well, kevan dibitar nami ikanis yove lo kaime But the Gemara answers that also won't be good, right? Meaning, again, what's the concern? We're going to have this Ovid Kochavim who is milking the cow unsupervised. The concern is that maybe he mixed in a little bit of non-kosher milk, and that's going to be the problem. So we're trying to figure out, but why is it a problem? Why don't you just take a sample from the milk, add rennet to it, and see if it curdles. And if it curdles, so if this little sample curdles, so then we're talking about kosher milk. Well, the issue is that even when milk curdles, apparently, I'm no expert, but I'm the opposite of an expert, but apparently when the milk curdles, you're still going to have some whey. Some of it curdles, but then you have whey, some liquid that's left there. So the fact that it doesn't all become one solid clump, you're anyways going to have some stuff that isn't going to curdle. So you may have tamei milk, right? What's not curdling may also be the tamei milk there. So there might actually be tamei milk mixed in, and just doing a little, sample, taking a little sample and experimenting with curding isn't going to be enough of an indication. Alternatively, and now once we have mentioned, so it says, so there's another gear that instead of Ibai, which I kind of like, it says Hashta de Osis Lachi. So now that you have mentioned this point, that even when it comes to curdling, there's going to be whey that doesn't curdle, and there might be that might be where the non-kosher milk is. Well, then our initial suggestion of why don't you just make it into cheese and see if it cheeses, that also it won't be an indication per se, because there might be some non-kosher milk mixed into that as well, and the kosher milk will cheese, kind of like we saw according to Rashi earlier on the opinion in his explanation of Efshar B'lo Tzachzuche Chalav, right? That even if you make cheese, in the air bubbles inside of the cheese may be where the tummy milk, which didn't cheese, might be hanging out. So even if it becomes cheese, you really might just be seeing the kosher milk that cheesed, but there may still actually be non-kosher milk in there, and it's hanging out in the air pockets. Okay, so that seems to be the issue. So that's the concern with Chalav Yisrael, that we're concerned that maybe there was some tamei milk that was mixed in to the kosher milk. Okay, I actually don't know if I actually read that inside, right? So we said, Ibai Semo or Hasha, das ist Lachi, Hafilu Tema, de Kaboi, La, Legvina, Ika de Koi Beni Atve, that even if you want to make this mixture into cheese, it won't be an indication because you might have the non-kosher milk in the air bubbles. Ve'apas. And now to finish off today's daf, which I thought was an all-star daf, very interesting daf, I thought, to finish up, Pas Akum. Rav Kahana says, Rav Kahana, Rav Yochanan, Pas Lo Itira Bebezdin. So it says Rav Kahana, the name of Rav Yochanan, that bread was not permitted in Bezdin, right? Because after all, in the Mishnah, we saw that Rebbe Uvezdinu Hitira Shemen, okay, that Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya in his Bezdin said that Shemen Akum is allowed. So Rav Kahana, Rabbi Yochanan points out that no such allowance was made for bread. No such allowance was made for bread. Now, Michlal de'ika man deshari. Now, why did you have to say that? Why did you have to say that? No, don't get any ideas when it comes to bread. Did we have ideas? Was there some kind of movement? Was anybody saying like, Pasakum surely be permitted, don't get any ideas? But was anybody saying it should be permitted? That we have to say don't get any ideas? In Taka, yes. The Chazar of Dimi, Omar, when Avdimi came from Etzisot Bavel, he said, Pam achaz yotzer Rebbe lasodeh. One time Rebbe went out to the field. If you ovid kochavim lefan of paspurni, my fesoya, and an ovid kochavim came and he whipped out a bread from a purni oven, type of oven. On my Rebbe, and Rebbe said, Kamo noya pazo, what a shena bread. What a beautiful loaf. Maro chacham leosra. Why would the chachamim have made it osr for me to eat? Maro chacham mishum chasnas. What do you mean? Why would the chachamim have made pas akum osr? Because of chasnas. Concerned that if the Yidden and the Ovdei Kochavim are sitting zusammen and sharing bread and eating bread, So then, one thing leads to the next, and all of a sudden their children start dating and getting married. Yeah, but what Rebbe was saying is, why did the Chachamim need to forbid it, even in such a spontaneous thing like out in the field, outside of the city in the field? I can understand in the city, you don't want of the Chavim and Yidden neighbors zusammen in the same neighborhood, everyone getting together. I can understand why that can lead to a bad place, but in terms of intermarriage, but out in the field, a spontaneous interaction, and Ovik Chavim whips out a loaf of bread. What should be the problem with that? Nobody's getting married. This is a one-off kind of thing. So Kisfor Na'am, when the people saw Rebbe make such a statement, so the people thought, Hitir Rebbe a pas? Wow, Rebbe said, a pas akum is allowed. Veloi, but it's not true. Rebbe lo, hitir as a pas. Rebbe did not say that pas akum is permitted. Rav Yosef, Yitema, Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda Amar, Lo kachoyim ma'aseh. This isn't exactly what happened. Ella, rather, Amru, they said, Pam achas holach Rebbe, the Makom Echad. One time Rabbi Yehuda Nasi went to a certain place. Ra, I assume it's not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Ra, pas dochuk l'talmidim, and he saw that there wasn't enough bread for all the students. Amar Rebbe, and Rebbe said, Ein kan palter, is there no baker over here? Kisvurna am lomar palter ovid kochavim. The people thought, was Rebbe calling for a ovid kochavim baker? Vulo amar ela palter Yisrael. But that's not what Rebbe was talking about. He was talking about a Jewish baker. And says Reb Chabal that even according to opinion, who said that Rebbe, who thought that Rebbe was asking for a non-Jewish baker, Lamar and Ella deleka palter Yisrael, you would only be able to use pas palter of an ovei kochavim when there was no Jewish baker there. But if there's a Jewish baker, then you got to go to the Jewish bakery. You got to buy from the Jewish bakery. Yochanan Omer says, that even according to the opinion who said we're talking about a non-Jewish baker, hanemile basada, that was only allowed in the field. Aval ba'ir, if we're talking about in a city, lo, that would not be allowed mishum chasnas, because we're concerned about intermarriage. In a city, you would not be allowed to buy baked bread baked by a Evo ava mankis ve'ochil pasad be'mitzrei Evo. I don't know if it's a reference to Rav's father. No, it can't be, because we're talking about Menachem Bayit. No, I assume it's somebody else named Evo. He was eating pas from an Oved Kochavim by, it sounds like, maybe the outskirts of the city. Amr lehu Rava v'tem Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and Rava, some say Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, said to the students, the people, lo tishto ba'adi de Evo, don't hang out, don't associate yourselves with Evo, the kachel achmedar moy, because he's eating Aramean bread. Okay, so from the Gemara it sounds like no such allowance was made for pas akum. However, tosfos, if you look at tosfos, the Maschil Michlal, so he says 3 lines into the tosfos, umikan somchu ata, that now they rely from here lechol pas shalov de kochavim, to eat the bread of the ovdei kochavim. Kevin shalo poshat isuru b'chol yisrael. We're going to learn more about this tomorrow. That since the iser, right, the Mishnah had said that we don't eat pas of an ovdei kochavim. However, that gezerah didn't stick. It never was fully accepted among the Yidden. And we only make a gezerah on the tzibur if the majority of the people are going to be able to stick to this gezerah. And it seems like for these reasons, we don't necessarily, right? So he says, right, it sounds like at least during the time of Tosfos, sounds like the minhag was that pas akum was okay. Of course, not giving any shot of it. I have to ask Josh Wyman for that he psak over here. But anyways, I don't know if he wants to give psak either. But anyways, it's very, very interesting at the very least to see what Tosfos is saying over here. And it's very interesting to see how Tosfos elaborated today's daf in general. That was Daf Lamed Hey, Masechta Avodah Zarah. I think it was a fascinating daf We talked about Rennet and how that relates to nevela and how it relates to making cheese and kvinas akum. Bichlal, what was the deal with that gezerah and the dialogue between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yoshua, and why Rabbi Yoshua didn't want to tell Rabbi Yishmael what was really behind the gezerah of the cheese, and the questions about, if cheese is really about Giloy, and does Giloy even apply nowadays, and how does that affect whether cheese is kosher or not? And that was a very interesting that was a very interesting discussion, as well as discussion about Chalav Israel and about Pas Akum. Very, very interesting things on Daf Lamed of Masechta Avodah Zarah. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one. Cheers.